Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representatives Candace Perucci and Carol Spackman-Moss. Great to have both of you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Here.
Let's talk about China. Some big stories coming out during the week. This was also an issue that came up during the legislative session. We'll get more into that in just a second. But first, let's talk about what we saw, these escalated military exercises toward Taiwan. It appeared to be in retaliation because Taiwan's president met with Speaker McCarthy here in the United States. Representative Perucci, let's start with you. Your thoughts on the latest developments through the week.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having us on the show, Glenn. So this is something China does. They did this when Speaker Pelosi visited a year ago to actually go to Taiwan. They always flex after, a high-ranking U.S. official meets with a representative from Taiwan. And this was historic that Speaker McCarthy met with the Taiwan president on U.S. soil, first time in America's history. So they're definitely flexing their military might and their strength with their fighter jets and their ships through the Taiwan Strait. We should absolutely be taking this seriously and I think increasing our capacity with national defense. I also think we should be aware this is what China does. The Chinese government tries to intimidate and bully people to stand down. But what we need to be doing right now is signaling that we do stand with the people of Taiwan and that we are preparing ourselves militarily.
Representative Spackman-Moss, your thoughts on what's happening and the threat potentially China poses to us in the United States and even potentially here in Utah?
Well, I think that they're a force that we have to take very seriously because of the power they have now, geopolitical power. In the next decade or two, they could dominate the world, and we do not want that to happen. I think they're planning to take over Asia, and they certainly like to have Taiwan back. It's very important. I mean, with geopolitical power, you also have economic power. And I think the move to start manufacturing more goods in the United States is a good move. And look at Taiwan. We get 60% of the microchips come from Taiwan and 90% of the ones that are used most frequently. So, we have a big economical situation at stake with Taiwan, as well as just a friendship and protecting their freedom.
Representative Perucci, you ran several bills targeting China and the Chinese government. Talk about what those did and why you thought that was important.
So we have seen over the past decade and beyond, China is smart. And the Chinese government has found that in Congress, they receive regular briefings, but at the state legislature, we as legislators don't receive regular intel briefings, and you definitely don't receive that at the local level either. And so the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence actually published a report several years ago highlighting the fact that China has been incredibly successful by going state by state, developing relationships with different legislators and trying to influence their perspective on China and their global perspective. So some of the bills that I've worked on and been able to pass, two that were really significant, and most recently, we passed legislation to prohibit China and their military proxy companies from purchasing or owning land in Utah, period. So they will not be able to own land. If they currently own land in Utah, they have to sell it, and they have 5 years to do that until it escates or it comes back to the state. Another significant piece of legislation dealt with our education system. And as the chair of education, this is really important to me. Confucius Institutes, Confucius classrooms have been identified as major propaganda outlets for the Chinese Communist Party. And what China was doing was they were going to districts, they were going to universities and saying, hey, we'll fund a language learning program for you. We provide the teachers, we own the contracts. And then there are just a few things that stipulate with that. And they would sanitize curriculum. And in some cases across the country, they had concerns of espionage and hacking issues and whatnot. So we had 2 Confucius Institutes in Utah, and I ran legislation to close both of those and also ran legislation to prohibit our K-12 entities from receiving any funding from restricted foreign entities like China. I think those are important steps to dilute and eventually remove any Chinese influence, any Chinese government influence. I also will highlight one other bill that made it to where you would have to register as a foreign lobbyist if you lobby on behalf of a foreign government. This seems like a no-brainer, but there was a gap in Utah code. So those are some of the significant pieces of legislation I've worked on. I do think it would be great to have a more concerted effort from a national level to work with our local elected officials and make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to national security and the Chinese Communist Party.
Representative Spackman-Moss says these are bills that had bipartisan support, so we won't necessarily get into those elements with you. But what we have seen on a national level, we also saw it with the governor taking action and saying no more TikTok on state devices. But we've seen this effort on a national level to ban TikTok in connection with the Chinese government. Do you think that is an appropriate step forward?
The biggest concern that I have with TikTok are the algorithms that are really specifically aimed at children, particularly vulnerable young people. And they will see what they view, and then they give them things that might lead them in ways that would be very dangerous to their mental and even physical health. That's a huge concern, and we ought to force them to deal with that if they won't sell TikTok. But the reality is there are 150 million users of TikTok. Many people make their living via TikTok, and I don't know how enforceable it would be if we tried to ban it completely because of First Amendment rights. And for the same reason, I have concerns that the social media bans will be totally effective, because you do get into those issues that many people use it for positive things. And so I don't know if that would be effective. They might find other ways. They already have data on us, and other Google and Apple, which have similar platforms, they also get data, and a lot of it's for advertising purposes. But if it's for nefarious purposes, we do need to protect young people.
Representative Perucci, your thoughts on the TikTok effort? Should it be banned here in the United States?
I absolutely think so, and there's a critical reason why, and it's the parent company of TikTok is subject to Chinese law, which requires them to report personal and private data back to the Chinese government. And I think that's a serious issue. The FBI, the Federal Communications Commission, have all issued warnings to users of TikTok to know that your information can and is possibly being shared with the Chinese government, which I think is a huge issue. And it's also largely used by our young people. There are lots of different social media platforms and ways that they can express themselves, but I definitely think as Americans we need to be more aware of the platforms they're using and who's funding those platforms and what they're using your information for.
All right, let's move on to 2024. It'll be a big election year. During the week, Speaker Brad Wilson, whom you both work with up at the legislature, announcing that he is forming an exploratory committee to look at the possibility of running for Senator Romney's Senate seat. Representative Spackman-Moss, assess Speaker Wilson as a potential candidate for Senate.
Well, I think he'd be a strong candidate. I really do. I see him all the time and have known him for many years, and he's a good leader. But if you look at the history of people that have come from the legislature and run for Congress, they haven't been successful. There are at least 10 that I can think of. And so I don't know if his name recognition is as large as he may think it is, or some may think it is, being Speaker of the House. A lot of people still think I'm in Congress or I'm on a city council. So it will be interesting. If he goes up against Mitt Romney, I'm not so sure he'd succeed. But if Romney doesn't run, I think he'd probably be one of the front runners.
Representative Perucci, some of your thoughts on that potential?
Well, this definitely is breaking news. Speaker Wilson, I think, has done a fantastic job as Speaker of the House, and I think he would do really well as a candidate for U.S. Senate. He has a lot of, obviously, leadership experience and unique capabilities that would serve him really well. He also is going to be able to fundraise really well and I think mobilize and get campaign pulled together quickly if needed. And I think announcing that step of an exploratory committee obviously is signaling he's very serious about it. Mm-hmm. And obviously also watching the field to see if Senator Romney stays in. It's likely, in my opinion, that he wouldn't. But there will also be other people who jump in, I'm sure, if this becomes an open seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my sources have indicated that Speaker Wilson would not run if Senator Romney was running again. So read into that what you will, but we will see how that plays out. Representative Spackman-Moss, Democrats last time didn't even nominate a candidate. What do they need to do to be competitive in a Senate race?
Well, I think it's very important that we nominate a candidate, that we have somebody in every position from the top down to the bottom in every race. And I mean, that really is a goal of the party. And it will be a challenge, but I think it's very important to give people options, because people have felt in the last few elections they really didn't have options for some of those top positions. So I think we'll find a candidate and someone that will be impressive, and we will be, as Democrats, very proud to support.
All right. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We'll have to end it on that note. Really insightful conversation this morning. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks,
Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.